Fresh off of taking down the New Jersey Devils, the Jets are welcoming the Buffalo Sabres into town for a big game that could see the Jets add another important victory and a chance to perhaps pad their lead in third place in the Central Division. We'll dive into what to expect and some other headlines from around the NHL, all coming right up on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Good evening, friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HOLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. As always, thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day, every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and be sure to use promo code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase over your next concert or hockey game tickets. Stay tuned to find out more about how Game Time can save you time and money on your next ticket purchases. Now, like I said, obviously, the Jets are kind of doing pretty reasonably well over the past few games. A couple of losses mixed in with some big wins, and we've seen overall a couple of common threads emerge, right? The Jets at even strength, pretty good. The Jets goaltending and special teams, two big weaknesses, one of which we do expect to improve on its own. Obviously, Hellebuyck is somebody that you have reasonable confidence by the end of the season. He's back in the Vezina conversation. The special teams, maybe more of a question mark until Vilardi comes back. And even with Vilardi, still a question mark if I'm being honest. The PK could definitely use some work, and let's not kid ourselves, the power play hasn't exactly been as lethal as it should be. But in the meantime, obviously the Jets are welcoming in an interesting Buffalo Sabres team that is just getting Alex Tuch back. Based on the lineups, we've got a couple of, new additions to the Sabres team that I'm not even familiar with. Some of them are drafted, some of them are players who got traded or brought in through trades and stuff. On the first line, you've got Skinner, Cousins, and Tuch, which obviously Cousins is an extremely skilled player, and paired with a great natural finisher in Jeff Skinner and Alex Tuch, who at one point was kind of hailed as the, Blake Wheeler light or 2.0, whatever you want to call it. Obviously, Alex is a really cool guy, one of Vegas's best former players. And when he arrived to the Sabres, I was like, oh, sheesh, that's a pretty nice addition to a Buffalo team that is trying to improve and get itself into a playoff-ready state, even though goaltending and a number of other issues have kind of held them back from being truly great. But at least this first line, a lot of skill, very dangerous, and you could expect that that power play is going to be a problem. Second line, you've got Benson, Mittelstadt, and Peterka. Obviously, a couple of really big draft picks here in Benson and Peterka. Mittelstadt, interestingly, has kind of resuscitated his NHL career after it was sort of thought that he'd be a little bit more on the disappointing side, right? Obviously, there was a stretch in college where people were talking about him as like Jack Eichel 2.0, and that didn't really happen. But he's actually kind of rehabbed his career and become a really solid middle six player. And with Benson and Peterka, who are both extremely skilled and very dangerous scoring threats, Benson in particular, that's going to be a very tough matchup for Winnipeg's top six. The third line of Greenway, Jost, and Olofsson is interesting. Greenway, of course, is like a defensive specialist. Jost has sort of been, sort of a bottom six player. I think a lot of the potential that people thought of him when he was a top draft prospect from, World Junior performances, never really lived up to that. But in terms of just being a solid third or fourth liner, yeah, that's what you're getting out of him. Olofsson, of course, I think that's the guy who had a really big rookie season maybe a year or two ago, has since kind of settled into like a solid middle six role. Pretty decent finishing, but this third line I think is going to be one of those where the Lowry line should be able to win this matchup, especially with Nino Niederreiter and Appleton really cooking recently. Your fourth line is Girgensons, Rusek, and Okposo. Girgensons, it's amazing to see him still around. I remember when he was talked about as kind of, I don't know, they're sort of a talisman player. I don't know, something about him was always very hardworking, industrious, and he's actually put up some pretty solid defensive results over the years. So, yeah, I mean, this arrangement of forward lines is reasonably deep. I'd say it's not as good as Winnipeg's, to be honest, but it should be a tight and tough battle. On defense, you've got Dahlin, Samuelson, then Power, and I think Johnson. I don't know who that is. And then Clifton and Eric Johnson. So yeah, I mean this blue line is mobile. Obviously, Dahlin and Power are two of their really big drafted prospects, and then you were rounding it out with a couple of decent veterans. And I mean, it's not a great team, and I think the biggest problem for that blue line is that behind them. You've got it could be Eric Comrie making a start. So I expect Comrie will play. I mean, obviously he likes to play against Winnipeg, and it's either that or Levi and Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, who were not in the starters practice today. So that'll be interesting. Should be a fun one for Comrie. I expect Winnipeg will probably want to light him up, but we'll see. For what the Jets are doing, almost all of their lines are going to be the same. The only change is that replacing Kupari, who's going to be out for about 4 to 6 weeks. You've got Axel Janssen-Fjallby rejoining the Jets. Obviously, Janssen-Fjallby, big deal in terms of like fun factor and speed. In terms of anything else, he's a decent PKer, right? That's pretty much what you're expecting. But he should slide in perfectly fine. I don't really expect anything to be too crazy. Winnipeg is going to go back to having 12 forwards and 6 defenders after running 11-7 last game. So Stanley obviously is going to be riding Pine. We'll expect Hellebuck back in. And, of course, the Jets are also probably keeping an eye on the health of some of their roster, especially guys who are slowly coming back, as really they can't afford any more injuries. This team, I wouldn't say the next injury is going to kill them, but I think they would certainly like to have a little bit more security rather than starting to scrape the bottom of the barrel with call-ups for injury replacements. I think Winnipeg is, starting to get to that point with the bottom 6. Not so much the top 6. Top 6 seems to be fine. But in terms of depth players, yeah, let's hope that Winnipeg stays relatively healthy and we get to see some really cool stuff from Janssen-Fjallby, who should do well alongside Gustafsson and Barron. But of course, the Jets are really keen on getting a couple of big players back. We'll talk about who these guys are and how they can really figure into Winnipeg's present and future in just a little bit. Before we go any further, though, I did want to shout out our friends and partners at Game Time. When it comes to buying tickets, obviously a lot of you are probably used to paying lots of money. You get gouged on fees, and sometimes you're not even sure where you're sitting. Game Time is here to help. They want to take all of the guesswork out of the tickets that you're buying, and they want to save you not only time, but also money. Sometimes they say time is money, and in this case, it kind of can be, because Game Time offers you last-minute ticket deals and flash deals. They've got plenty of great prices, and they also show you previews from your seat so you know what you're actually paying for, which is always really nice, right? You don't want to have an obstructed view that surprises you out of nowhere. Everyone hates that. I hate it. If you're a Red Sox fan, you know that there's a very famous section that's got a very big pole kind of sitting in front of one of the end seats. Let's avoid that, right? Game Time wants to give you all of the best seats and prices, again, with their last-minute ticket deals. They offer a lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, and so much more. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and be sure to use promo code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you for rejoining us in tonight's episode as we are talking about some big things for Winnipeg, and obviously one of those big things for the Jets is the health of the team, right? Sort of a couple of big players who are potentially returning from injury. Before we talk about Gabriel, Vilardi, and Ville Heinola and what their status is and how they could really impact the present and future of this season, I did want to let you know about something really cool that the Locked On Network is cooking up. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with our local experts, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All brought to you by the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, thanks again as we are talking about Gabriel Vilardi and Ville Heinola. Obviously, the timeline for Vilardi is a little bit more, I would say, close to being fulfilled. He is practicing in a non-contact jersey, and for all of us, that is like one of the biggest sighs of relief you could possibly imagine. You know, having Vilardi back for this top six would be a massive boost, right? Before he got injured, he had a point in 3 games. But more importantly, you saw him creating good chances. There was strong defensive work. In terms of what he was doing alongside Scheifele and Scheifele and Connor, they were cooking as a trio. There was natural chemistry. Vilardi was kind of helping with transition and defensive reads. And also, he's just a great finisher, and he's getting into really dangerous areas. Of the 3 players that the Jets acquired out of the Dubois deal, Vilardi, for me, was the most exciting because his potential is sky high. He's super talented. All he has to do is stay healthy, and that's kind of been the boogeyman that sort of haunted his career. Now, in this case, this particular injury that he had was more just unlucky than anything, but obviously we want a quick recovery, and should he return soon, obviously the Jets would get a huge boost up top and on the power play. His work down low, I think, is really underrated because he's got great hand-eye coordination. He can tip pucks effectively. He's not afraid to be kind of a trigger man in the slot, and he's a pretty big guy. He's not a small player, so he's got a big frame that can kind of block and screen, and he knows how to use it to cut down sight lines. So there's a lot to love with Vilardi, and I really hope that at some point when it comes to a contract extension that he decides to commit to Winnipeg long-term. Because if he becomes part of this core for the future, I'm telling you, this Jets team is going to cook. He's really good and backed by, young burgeoning talents in Perfetti and Lambert, McGroarty, Barlow at some point. All these kids are going to come up, in the near future and in the longer term future. And having somebody like Vilardi or, and Perfetti to welcome them in, it can only mean good things. Now, the other injured player who potentially is a few weeks away from coming back, but is slowly nearing, a healthier state is Ville Heinola. And Heinola, before he got injured, really looked like he was about to set this Jets blue line on fire. He was confident. He was assured. He was making really strong defensive reads. His passing and offensive play were on point. Everything, from preseason indicated that he was ready for a big role. And then tragedy struck, and obviously he had basically a third of his season taken away. So Vilardi actually was, I think, at the rink today. He did have something on his leg, and somebody asked him, I don't know who it was one of the Jets local media. They asked him how he was doing, how he was feeling, and obviously he's not skating yet, but he said he's feeling good, better than it was before, feeling stronger. So for me, Vilardi is kind of the guy who's going to supplant Nate Schmidt. I don't think they're ever going to bench Pionk, and they're certainly not going to bench Dillon. So Schmidt, for me, is the odd guy who's going to come out. I'm not going to be surprised if it's Sandberg instead, but I feel like that would be a mistake. I know that Sandberg hasn't been as flawless as we'd hoped this season, but overall still a really good player and one of Winnipeg's better defenders overall. So I think Schmidt, for me, you can see that the mobility in his game is kind of going away, and Heinola can play on the right side. So I think Ville would slide in very naturally, would probably be able to bring a little bit more jump and a little bit more skill, and also is a guy that you could use on the power play. Heinola was really controlled. I thought that his power play work in the preseason looked really sharp. For a team that needs a special teams jump, both Vilardi and Heinola coming back would really do some great stuff for the power play. Unfortunately, them returning doesn't necessarily help the penalty kill, and the penalty kill stuff is more tactical in my mind anyways. But all that said, I think the Jets would just really be thrilled to have both of those guys back. Ville, obviously for Winnipeg is an important young player, somebody that I think the Jets are starting to become more and more comfortable with giving him bigger minutes, bigger roles. I think, from preseason, we've seen that they're increasingly trusting him. So all he needs is to stay healthy this year and put on some really good opening shifts and games once he's back in the lineup. And I think Winnipeg will realize it does, in fact, have a gem in him. So a lot to get excited for. But, the special teams, I'm sure, would love to have their talents, especially Vilardi's down low. And if the Jets decide to use Heinola as a power play quarterback, let's go. That's one of his best skills. And I think it would be a really helpful thing, especially with how the Jets kind of need more mobility and, off the puck activity with a guy who's really offensively aggressive. I think if Heinola can do it, I think he'll be fun. And I'm hoping that his injury has not held him back to the point where he's going to have lost a big step when he returns. I'm sure it'll be a bit of a rusty learning curve, but hopefully it won't take him too long to get back up to game speed. But of course, speaking of players like Vilardi, I thought it'd be fun to check in on how the LA boys are doing and how pierre-luc Dubois is doing, since we just saw out of LA that somebody said Dubois needs to lead with more urgency. And if you're a Jets fan, you know exactly what they are talking about. My goodness. We all love a bit of drama and some smack talk. And let me tell you, I think the Jets fans are eating pretty good on that one, if we're being honest. Before we talk about all that fun stuff and get into the nitty gritty, though, did want to shout out our friends and partners at FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet when they score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. That's $150 if your team wins and you get the right moneyline bet. Obviously, for those of you who are like Ravens fans like me, the Ravens win a lot, right? Maybe you want to get a little bit risky, though. Maybe you're a Vikings fan and you really think that their resurgence this season from Hawkinson and company is something to believe in. Maybe you're a Texan fan who thinks that CJ Stroud is the real deal. No matter what, you can be sure that when you place your $5 moneyline bet, when you win, you get $150 back to try your luck again, because after all, you know sports and you know your football. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's never been a better time to get in on the action than right now. The app is super easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and so much more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season in style. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for joining us in tonight's episode as we talk about some fun drama surrounding pierre-luc Dubois in LA. Let's be honest, he was signed to a huge money deal, and so far, he's not really been delivering the sort of performance that I think a lot of people expected. Thus far, he's rocking 8 points in 14 games, which is not terrible, but given the fact that he was brought in to be obviously LA's answer to needing an elite second-line center, it's not quite been that. It's not really been smooth sailing. And it's not like he's been poor, but I think the expectations for him, both on the power play and at even strength, and what they thought they were getting in him, it's not quite been as explosive as I think they were expecting. And when you look at what the Jets have gotten out of Iafallo, Kupari, and Vilardi in different, measures, I think LA fans are probably a little bit disappointed so far. The Jets actually have the top scorer out of all four of those in Alex Iafallo. Iafallo has already worked himself up onto the first line, which I don't know that anyone was really expecting. He has recently found a good hot streak with Kyle Connor and Mark Scheifele. Iafallo is also one of the Jets. There's like 3 of them to have a 4-assist game, which is pretty random. I don't think anyone thought that he would have 4 assists in a single game, let alone in like a stretch of games. That's a lot of points. And Iafallo has just been really effective at being a nice complementary winger. Some of the finishing that I thought he might have brought from his preseason run hasn't quite transferred over. But in terms of getting into the right areas, being a guy who's a great passer, and somebody who I just thought, like I said, when he first arrived, I thought he was underappreciated. And I thought he was a bit of an underrated talent. And so far, that has kind of lived up to expectation. Iafallo has really fit in Winnipeg's top 9. I was a big fan of his before he arrived, and so far he has kind of proven me right. Rasmus Kupari, excuse me, prior to his injury that sidelined him for a few weeks, he's been okay. He's really fast, and I feel like that's generally the main thing that he brings. Um, Offensively, he'll drive to the slot, he'll create some good chaos down low. But the thing with Vilardi that I've noted, or with Kupari that I've noticed, is that sometimes he has these decisions where it feels like he kind of makes a bad choice, and one that's perhaps a bad penalty or a risky deke or dangle through an opponent that doesn't go well, and it ends up just not really going anywhere. So I can kind of see why the Kings perhaps were a little bit okay with letting him go. But by the same token, I feel like so far in a bottom six role, Kupari's been fine. It's kind of like that tier of player where he's probably more offensively gifted than we saw with Kevin Stenlund, but I don't know if that's going to necessarily reflect in lots of points or anything like that. Again, like I said, Kupari's just been kind of like okay, but if you were to bench him for, I don't know, a David Gustafsson or something, I don't think anyone would really notice a huge difference. Now, the one that I think a lot of Jets fans are going to be a little bit disappointed by because he just hasn't been able to actually play all that much is Gabriel Vilardi. Vilardi showed off really well in preseason, looked like a great fit, and it was really just poor luck that saw him sprain his MCL. So thankfully, that's a pretty short-term injury, relatively speaking. He is nearing full health. He'll be back pretty soon, probably sometime maybe next week. If his practices continue to go well and he's able to put on a full contact jersey, that'd be pretty freaking cool. Overall, again, like I said, I think that he's close. So far, it seems like he's feeling pretty good. There haven't been any setbacks reported. And if he comes back in the next week or two, that would be a super big deal for the Jets, especially over the stretch run, because Winnipeg's schedule is not going to be easy, right? Obviously, the Jets are going to have some tough opponents in teams like, surprisingly, Arizona, the Lightning, Panthers. They're going to have the Stars again pretty soon. Yeah, it's a tough stretch heading through December, and Winnipeg is going to want to especially gain some ground on teams like Colorado, who have recently been a little bit mediocre. This is a great time where the Jets can kind of claw back, a top 2 spot maybe in the Central. Is it a lot to ask for? Absolutely. Do I think it's completely out of reach? Not necessarily. I think the Jets have as decent of a shot as anyone because the Central Division right now is pretty chaotic. There's only a couple of teams that I would really believe in, Dallas being one of them. You'd expect Colorado to also probably be decent, but other than that, right? The Wild are not great. The Preds are kind of bad. Arizona is currently doing pretty well, but you don't know if that's going to really last. So there's a lot for the Jets to potentially work with here. I'm just excited to have Vilardi back. I think that's just generally all that I think about is I'm just happy to have Winnipeg slowly getting healthy. And, the fact that all of these players have played big roles for the Jets in one capacity or another, while Dubois has kind of been a little bit underwhelming for LA, just for me serves to reinforce the point that the Jets definitely made the right choice and that I felt like they won the trade. So let me know what you think about this one. Drop your thoughts in the comments below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's show, though, that is going to be all the time that we have. Thanks so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We'll see you back here tomorrow for even more Jets coverage. Don't go anywhere. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe. And as always, have a great night and go Jets go.